Hello and welcome for take two of everything about panels. Let's talk about surfaces. I'm sorry that last time didn't work out so well. Obviously, there were some technical difficulties, but hopefully you can come back and we can discuss a little bit more than we did with the Q&A about specifically panels, because this is a huge, huge subject. Don't forget, there is a PDF download of all the information that I've kind of gathered in terms of what I feel is the best surface to paint on and kind of why. But of course, I will elaborate more today about all of those surfaces and then some. There are so many options out there, and it's really hard to know where to start, especially if you're brand new to painting. You'll hear artists say, well, you need to paint on a panel, or you need to paint on a rigid surface, or just surface in general. That is a broad topic. So what is it that you're actually looking for in your surfaces? So in the PDF download, if you have it with you, you can kind of follow along, but there are four main surfaces that artists tend to use, and there are definite pros and cons to each one. The first one that I have in there is the Baltic birch plywood. This is, I think this is 3/8 inch plywood, either that or 1/4 inch plywood. I use both thicknesses. For the larger panels, I'll use thicker plywood. And then for the smaller studies, I'll use thinner plywood. So this is Baltic birch plywood. It's important that it's Baltic birch because it's less acidic and won't affect the canvas that is applied to it on top as other plywoods would. So Baltic birch plywood. Besides, it looks really, really nice, much nicer than other plywoods. So that's the first one. The second one is aluminum composite, or ADF. I believe it's, yeah. Anyway, it's just kind of aluminum. It has usually canvas adhered on the front. It's just metal. It's just kind of a thin metal. Really durable, really durable. But I'll tell you why I don't love these in a minute. Next one is very, very common. Probably the most common one is MDF. MDF you can get everywhere. It's in all the art stores. It's in all the hardware stores, ready to go, cheap. And I totally understand why people use it. But you can see it's very, very thin. It's very prone to warp. And there's only one side that you can actually use generally. You can get double-sided MDF that's smooth on both sides, but it's usually textured on one side. I don't know if you can see that, but it's shiny, smooth on this side, textured on this side. You always want to use the smooth side of MDF. And then the last one is foam core. You can see the foam in there. I have a painting on this one, but this is just kind of the paper that will come with it. You can get this pretty readily available. I know that all the big panel companies, will have it available. And then, I'll explain why this is really a great option for some things, but is really not my favorite option as well. So, again, if you refer to the PDF, I kind of highlighted 4 different categories of each one and how they rank on a scale from 1 to 5 for that category. So for the plywood, for sturdiness, this isn't moving pretty much, especially for the thicker plywoods, the 3/8 and sometimes an inch plywood. This is not going to warp when you paint on it. It's just 100% solid. It can warp if you are using a thinner plywood for a larger canvas. That's when things can get a little dicey. But on the whole, this is thick, sturdy. You can kind of bang it around. Nothing's going to happen. Things happen in the studio. sometimes paintings drop. Sometimes you have a plein air study that's just sitting in your car and things get jostled around, or in your plein air pack, whatever it is. This is super sturdy. I don't ever have to worry that I'm going to have a huge dent in my painting when I pull it out of my bag, that, the corner is going to get dinged up, nothing. It's just super, super sturdy, which is one of the main reasons why I like this the best. The aluminum is also pretty sturdy, but you can, because it is so thin, it is possible to dent the back, and that will show up in the painting. Probable, not as much. I mean, how many times are you going to be denting the back of a painting? Probably not, but it does happen sometimes. And so I don't love this for that reason. There are other reasons too, which I'll get into, but it is possible, and I have seen it happen before. So just to kind of be aware. Other than that, it's super lightweight. It's super sturdy. It's not going to warp at all. No matter, how big or small you paint, it's just not going to warp because it's metal, right? So that's a good option. The MDF is, like I mentioned before, extremely thin and absolutely will warp when you paint on it. It's why I do not love using MDF at all. If I can avoid it at all costs, I will not use MDF. This one was sent to me. This panel was sent to me, so I, keep it around. But the likelihood of me actually using this, especially for a finished piece, is very, very slim. I could prep it with some ground, like some oil lead ground, and paint on it that way, as studies and whatever. But it's just not my favorite. And like I said, it has this back that is kind of textured, and some of them get really, really textured, really gross feeling texture. This one is not so bad, but I can't use that. So if I use the front and I don't love the painting that I did, well, I can't attach anything on the back, it's just not my favorite. But people do use it very successfully and have done some amazing work on it. It's not a bad option. Any solid surface that you're painting on is going to be 10 times better than a stretched surface. Just keep that in mind. So we're comparing things that do have an impact, but not near as much as if you have an open back surface from a stretch canvas. And then foam core. This really does dent easily. If it drops, like sometimes things just drop off the easel. You don't mean to. You thought that you had it tightened down, but it wasn't. It drops down on the floor. This corner is going to be gone and busted. Things can come through the back. If it ships out to, a gallery or to a collector or whatever, if anything happens to this from the back, you are 100% going to see it in the front. So that's why I do not love foam core. But the advantage of foam core is that it is very, very lightweight. It is the most lightweight of all of the surfaces that I'm going to be talking to you about, all except for one. I'll tell you that in a minute. So it is very lightweight, but it is, a bit thick. So it will take up a bit more space than, say, this, right? So you don't get the durability, the sturdiness of aluminum, and you also take up more space in like your plein air pack than aluminum. So things to keep in mind, right? Weight is definitely something that you have to consider when like going on a plein air trip. Okay, we have a question. Jenny is asking, what about painting on a metal panel? That is this is the metal panel, right? And there's a few different metal panels, and I'll get to that in a minute. But this is the main one that people, especially nowadays, are using because it's very widely available now through all of the main panel companies. And yeah, it's lightweight and it's pretty durable. other than what I had mentioned before. You can directly paint on this, and I will get to that in a moment. And I'll tell you why it's not my favorite to paint directly on, but canvas adhered to it is a great surface, not a problem. It's just like painting on any other canvas adhered surface. So yeah, I'll come back to your question, Jenny, and hopefully we will answer that completely for you. Okay, so ease of canvas adhesion. So you have all these raw panels, and a lot of people make their own panels. I'm one of them. I owned a business that I made my own panels. And so I had to think about this a lot. How do I adhere the canvas to the panel, or whatever it is that I'm painting on, to the panel, and how well will it stick? It's actually a very important and pretty in-depth question. You don't realize it. So with the Baltic birch plywood, it's great. I used rabbit skin glue for my panels. I will mention, it's a lot cheaper to make your own panels. It's a lot less convenient, of course, and sometimes you need specialty items to make your panels, but on the whole, it's so much cheaper. And being able to customize your own surface is very, very valuable in the long run. And knowing what it means to actually be able to customize your surface, super valuable. So I used rabbit skin glue. This is, hopefully you can see, rabbit skin glue from Gamblin. I don't know if that's going to pick up at all. There you go. Maybe you can see that. It comes in this box. And you can see it's little granules. This is my favorite rabbit skin glue to use, though there are more expensive, higher quality ones available. They're just a little trickier. And so this is kind of the easier option to kind of get to know what the glue is all about, is Gamblin's. It's still really good quality. So when I was running my business, I would sell my panels. Highly labor intensive, so that's why I had to quit. But that was the glue that I would use for them. And let me see. So what I would do is I would take raw linen and I would adhere it to a panel. I would wrap it around, so you can see that this is linen wrapped around. This is the raw linen. I would coat both sides with glue. And I would do 2 coats of glue. One would be to adhere the canvas to, or the linen to the panel, and what's called size it. And then the next one would be to seal it so that, the oil can't penetrate the linen. Super important, right? Because oil is what breaks down the linen. So we need to make sure that that is protected. And then I would do 2 coats of lead primer on top of that. I actually have a little demo piece that I created here. So we have our panel, our raw wood, raw linen. We have the first glue and the second glue here. You can kind of see the color change there. And then I would do 2 coats of lead primer. You have the first coat there and then the second coat there. And then I had a little stamp that I would put on back. You can see how clean everything is, etc. And it's a fantastic 100% top-notch surface to paint on. My absolute favorite surface to paint on, but it's a lot of work. There are easier ways to make panels. One of them is using a heat press, or less desirably use an iron, just like a clothes iron, to adhere with like Viva glue, which is it comes in like a sheet that you can cut out, or it comes as a liquid as well that you could use. Viva is what all the main panel makers today are using. It was created by conservators for the ease of use and for the ability to take the panel, or take the canvas off the panel and reapply it. So that if there is any conservation that needs to happen on the painting, super easy to take it off, put it back on, no damage whatsoever. So this is what was Viva glued. And Viva is a really great glue as far as easeability of use. It's awesome. But the hot point for, or the melting point for Viva is something like 120 degrees. So my problem with Viva is that it needs to be evenly heated up. So a heat press really is your best option for it. And B, if it starts to heat up, like in a car, if you're on a plein air trip, it can actually delaminate the canvas from the panel if your car gets too hot, which I leave panels in my car all the time. I don't want to have to worry about that. The rabbit skin glue, I never have to worry about that. I've never had an issue with delaminating glue from my panel because the glue actually soaks into the panel and grabs the linen with it. It's also the traditional glue from all the old masters. They would use hide glue or rabbit skin glue more specifically. So that's what I like about it. Okay, and let's see. Oh, canvas adhesion. We're still on canvas adhesion. The MDF is fine. It does have a bit of a surface here. You can see that it's a little shiny, which can kind of make it a little difficult to adhere canvas on there, but I wouldn't use probably Viva. I would definitely not use rabbit skin for that. I'd probably use a PVA, which is kind of like Elmer's glue. It's the off-brand, basically, Elmer's glue. Mod Podge works as well. The problem with Mod Podge or PVA is that you have to really make sure that the coat that you're putting on the panel is very, very even, and that any glue that seeps out of the panel, when you press it down to make sure that the adhesion is even throughout the panel so you don't get any bubbles, make sure that the entire panel on the edges is cleaned up, because if that dries, it is hard as a rock and you cannot get it off, really. You can cut it off, but it's dicey. The other thing I don't like about PVA is that if you do not get it even and you do have bubbles in your panel between the linen and the panel itself, it's really hard to get rid of, like almost impossible to get rid of. So I don't love that. And you can't undo it. So it's pretty permanent without doing significant damage to either your panel or your canvas, more likely your canvas. So I try to shy away from PVA when I can. It's definitely a cheap option. It's a widely available option, but you just have to kind of know your way around it better in order to get the best results out of it. And then the foam core is super easy to adhere to. It can use Viva glue, it can use PVA glue, and it will stick. The canvas will stick right on there, no problem. I wouldn't use rabbit skin glue for this at all. That might actually deteriorate it, so not a great option. But yeah, things will stick. I've never had an issue with anything coming up from a foam core panel. Okay, so if we're painting directly on the surfaces, how do those hold up? The Baltic birch plywood, I do have a painting here that I painted directly on the surface. I sealed it with shellac first. Again, the oil is what's going to deteriorate the surface underneath. So whether that be the linen or the panel itself, wood definitely can deteriorate, and so it will deteriorate under oil if it's not sealed properly. So just the spray shellac, or you can use this liquid shellac. This is probably the better option anyway, because it's de-waxed shellac. which means that they've taken the kind of waxy bits out of the shellac, which will more ensure that the oil adheres to the shellac itself instead of delaminate. It is possible if you used the regular waxed shellac that your oil painting will actually delaminate from the surface. Not a great option, right? So de-waxed shellac. And you can see it's kind of brown color, and it will say right down here, 100% wax-free shellac. I found this on the shelf at Ace, but that's the only place I found it on the shelf. I usually get it through like Amazon. So just heads up with that. With the aluminum, this is kind of an experiment painting that I was painting with. This is aluminum, and I was trying to see how it reacted to being painted on directly. And it was kind of a pain. After the first layer of paint gets on, it's easier because then you're painting on paint instead of on aluminum. But that first layer is pretty dicey to lay down. And so then I was trying to see how it reacted to some texture. It seems to be holding up. This is years ago, really well. So it's a really good option, but it can be tricky if you don't really know kind of how to navigate the surface. I would not ever paint directly on foam core. That's a terrible, terrible thing to do, so don't ever do that. And then painting, there goes all of my prepped panels. Painting on MDF, you can do it, but again, you have to prepare the surface with shellac or with gesso or something that will seal the panel itself. Okay, Nicholas asks, I've joined an Artist Academy last week. Can you give me some pointers for painting classes? Yes, I would check out Mackenzie Swenson's 14-day beginner series. It's awesome. She's not only a great friend of mine, but she is super smart, and she kind of goes over everything that you could need, what you're kind of looking for. Awesome, awesome teacher. So Mackenzie Swenson, 14-day beginner series. And then go over whatever else she has up there as well, because it's just brilliant. She's great. Jenny asks, which substrate is best for acrylic or oil painting? So it's kind of what you prefer. I prefer the Baltic birch plywood, personally. If you are painting directly onto the panel, acrylic is not going to have any reactions with the aluminum, which is, important. And then the oil is, just a different medium. It tends to seep down into the surface itself. So you have to be aware of that. So that's why it has to be completely sealed properly. But I do prefer the Baltic birch plywood myself. Carolyn asks, can I paint on paper without stretching it? Yeah, we're going to get to that, Carolyn. It's actually one of my favorite surfaces, honestly. If I'm just doing studies, it's an awesome, awesome surface to paint on. And I actually have a panel right here with some paper. Let me turn it around. This is painted on paper, and I adhered it to the Baltic birch plywood. And I sealed it with my shellac. So 2 coats of shellac. You can get a whole big paper. I use the Canson Mi Tientes paper. It comes in a ton of different colors. Please note, though, that when you do put the shellac on the paper, just brush it on. It will change the color. It will kind of deepen the color of the paper. So just be aware of that when you are picking your paper color. But this is, I think it's called sand, the paper color. You can kind of see the spots through there. And and it's awesome. So it will dry pretty quick. I let it dry overnight after I put 2 coats on, and then I can rip it up into whatever size, and it's good to go. So obviously the paper is super thin, so I can pack it up in my plein air case, and it's easy peasy. And then if I do like the painting, or I'm going to sell a painting or whatever it is, then I can just adhere it to a panel, and no one is none the wiser, right? The Mi Tientes paper, I will show you. I don't know if it will come through. You can kind of see that this is a smooth paper there, and then it has, I don't know if that's coming through at all, but it has a bit of a texture on the other side. Smooth paper, smooth side is better for me personally, but if you're adhering like a lot of paint, then the textured side may be what you're looking for. This one was waxed shellac. I didn't know at the time that I should be using de-waxed shellac. You can see it's pretty shiny. This is just a study, so I'm not too concerned about it, but and I didn't put like a ton of paint on there, but it is possible that, you know, this will disintegrate, delaminate as time goes on, which again is fine. This isn't like, you know, anything that I'm going to be putting in a museum. It just hangs in my studio. So paper is awesome, and I really enjoy painting on paper. I do it a lot, actually. Okay, I think, I did want to say one more thing with the Baltic birch plywood. Because if you are painting on larger panels, it still can warp. What you can do is what's called cradling the panel. And this is a cradled panel. So you have the painting obviously on the front with the canvas, and then you can see how wide this is. But the panel itself is not that wide. It's probably a 1/4 inch. But this will help keep it from warping. So it's just that little extra layer of protection to make sure that your painting is not warped, I've seen some warped paintings in frames, and it's really sad. It just kind of takes away just a little bit from your painting. You can correct some warping in frames, but if it's extreme, there's just not a whole lot you can do. And obviously when the painting is done, what do you do? You can't do a whole lot, especially if you can't take the painting off of the surface itself. Like if it's painted directly on, or if it's painted on a surface that was adhered to with like PVA or something that just isn't reversible, then you're stuck, with a warped painting. Okay. So hopefully that answers some questions. I did want to get into other options for panels. If you see right here, this one is painted on copper. I really enjoy painting on copper. There's another copper panel. It's a really cool surface to paint on because obviously it's shiny. And so you kind of want to keep that cool, nifty surface shining through. And so I haven't used this one because I want to design a really great painting for it specifically. This painting I did last year, and I did design it specifically for this panel because I'd had it in my studio for ages, and I was really, really wanting to paint on it. So I'm like, okay, I have to figure out how to actually do this. So you just kind of scuff it up a little bit with some sandpaper, and you just kind of go directly on it, and it's awesome. So give that a try if you want. Another surface, and this is pretty fancy, and I don't expect a whole lot of people to be able to do this, but this surface was given to me. It's marble. Really, really interesting. Again, scuff up the surface with some sandpaper, get all the shine off of it, and then you can paint directly on it. This painting, of course, is not going anywhere. The paint actually kind of seeps into the surface, So it is a bit more absorbent when you start to paint on it. And you have to be very careful about where you lay your strokes because it stains the marble. But other than that, I mean, you got a great painting. It's really heavy. I don't know what I'll ever do with this other than say, hey, cool, I painted on marble. Obviously, it's a weird size too. And so I can't like sell it really. It just hangs on my wall. But it was a really cool experiment. And yeah, if ever you get the chance, paint on marble. Why not? So yeah, those are kind of the oddball surfaces that I've painted on. I'm trying to see around my studio. I think that's pretty much it as far as different surfaces. I covered the adhesives as well. Okay. Sorry, now that everything fell down, I'm trying to double check to make sure that I covered everything. And I think that I did. Oh, here's another painting that I did. This is on one of my homemade panels. You can see it's that thick, and even at this size, no warping whatsoever. That's the back of it. So awesome surface. And if I do a painting on this surface that I don't enjoy, I can sand it down and paint again over and over and over again. It's an awesome surface. You can't do that with every surface out there. And so, yeah, I mean, it again, it's a kind of pain to get to that point to where I can paint on that surface, but it's well worth it. If I'm doing some gallery worthy or hopefully museum worthy work, I want my panel and surface to be the highest quality I can possibly get. And I want it to be able to last 200, 300, 400 years. So that's why I paint on my Baltic birch plywood with my portrait linen and my double lead primed surface. So Carolyn asks, what is the best substrate for mixed media? Ooh, interesting. So that kind of depends. I know that a lot of people prefer like gesso prepped surfaces for, either acrylic or mixed media, sometimes even oil. I don't prefer gesso for oil just because gesso is really, really absorbent. And so it's really tough to kind of move the paint around on top. But I would probably suggest like a gesso prepped panel would probably be your best option. Let me know if you have any other questions. I hope that this has been informative. It's a lot of information. I know it's a lot of information. And these are things that I've been studying for years now. And so, you can do a deep dive on materials, and people have. And there's just so much information out there. I did want to tell you some art companies that I get my panels through. Artifacts is probably my number one. I know them personally and they're awesome. I get my paints through them as well. Raymar is another great option. And the third one will come to me in a minute. Hannah G asks, how do you frame your finished works? I send it to my framer, which is about 20 minutes away, and I say, here, what do you think? I'm terrible with being able to pick out frames. I tend to like lighter frames, kind of more feminine, traditional type frames. I have, at least. I'm trying to shy away from those because not everyone loves them. So if I'm going to send a piece to a gallery, I've kind of taken a turn to something that more people will like, which is just kind of a simple black frame. Not as impressive or as interesting, but more people respond to that because they'll probably change out the frame anyway, so that it will match their decor. So if you have something on there that you spent few $100s on that is just going to get tossed, then what's the point, right? So I've pivoted recently to where I won't go with the fancy frame anymore unless I know where that painting is going to specifically go, or if the collector is working with me directly and says, I want you to pick the frame. Otherwise, it's going to be a simple black frame. But let's see, Michael Graham at Masterwork Frames, I want to say, and then Rhett Ashby at Ashby Frames. Those are my two framers that I use. They're both up the road from me, basically about 20 minutes away. But they work with artists all across the world, and they're really the best framers out there. They just happen to be very close to me. But yeah, so I get to talk to them on the regular, and they get to know your work and they get to know kind of what you're looking for. So if you want a recommendation for a framer, go with them. They are also comparable in terms of price to like going to Michael's or somewhere where you would get a custom frame. But the quality is so much better. They're using real gold if you want, and they're using, filigrees and molds for your frames that just are not going to be available at any other custom frame shop. So Ashby Frames and Masterwork Frames, look them up. They're awesome. And you can just send them your piece and say, hey, what do you think? And they'll tell you exactly what they think in terms of what would look best on your piece. So I've used them every time, actually, because I have no idea. But they know how artwork looks, right? And so they know what will look best on your piece. Okay, any other questions? I'm trying to make sure that, I covered everything. Again, I know it's a lot of information. And if you do have other questions beyond this, and you're like, oh, I should have asked, please either go through the Artist Academy website or email me directly, because I will just unload on you on all of the information that's out there. It's a lot. So hopefully this has been informative. If you want another session of kind of materials or anything like that, please let us know, and we can have kind of a more broad or in-depth conversation as well. Again, I'm using mostly oils. I know other people use a lot of acrylics, a lot of mixed media, a lot of watercolor, and those are going to be very specific needs. But the best I can do is what I can do. But as an oil painter myself, that's kind of my expertise. Okay, so if you haven't already, download the PDF. Has a lot of information on there. And I hope that this helps. Good luck in your painting, and happy painting.